It's good to see everybody. This is a great turnout, and I'm really glad that you stuck around for this presentation. This is, I don't remember the official title, but I think it's like Finding Your College Fit. So we're going to be talking about searching for colleges, the best colleges for you. This is a process that is going to take a while, for sure. So, just kind of seeing who's in the room right now. How many seniors do we have? Do we have any seniors? Okay, what about juniors? Okay, a lot of juniors. What about 10th graders? Okay, any 9th graders? Parents, guardians? 17-year-old vampires who've been 17 for a long time? Okay. That joke usually plays a little bit better in Washington, which is where I'm from. So I am Alex Hall. I'm an admissions counselor at the University of Washington. I am going to be giving a part of this presentation, but Ed, whom you've already met, is going to be giving the other part. So Ed, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Thanks, Alex. We forgot to ask, any parents here without kids and you're wondering if it's worth it? Yeah, there you go. Because we also sell real estate in our respective states, so try that out too. Yeah, I'm Ed Devine, work in the world of college admissions, been doing it for 30 years, multiple schools. I should also mention my wife is a college counselor. That's what gives me the most knowledge or street cred in this business. So welcome to the search, and we look forward to talking more about finding fit and how to do that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ed. I want to open with a little bit of a story, and then our presentation today is going to focus on several things. We're going to be talking about visiting colleges, so like some of the things that you can do to figure out what colleges fit best for you. Visiting colleges, thinking about things like SAT or ACT scores, financial aid is a pretty big part of that as well too, selectivity, other colleges that you can apply for. But I do want to open with a little bit of a story. So imagine this is years ago. Imagine a high school senior who, this is in the middle of a global pandemic, didn't have a lot of college resources and really didn't know what colleges to go to. So he just picked 2 colleges that sounded good that were close to him and applied and got into both of them, but didn't do a lot of college search process. And that person was ultimately happy, but sometimes wonders what would have happened if I had had a lot of these college resources or gone to one of these talks. Now this person is me. The global pandemic was the H1N1 swine flu. It was not COVID-19. But I understand, too, for many people, this might be a similar situation to one in which you found yourself or maybe find yourself. There are a few differences between 10 years ago and today in terms of finding colleges. For one, the Common Application and the Coalition Application are both a lot more widespread than they used to be. So we have students who are able to submit applications to lots of different universities relatively easily. We also have maybe more like virtual visit opportunities for students as well because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So you don't have to leave San Diego area, and yet you can visit so many other different universities just from the comfort of your own home. You could visit Harvard in your pajamas, and that's something that you probably were not able to do unless you were a trailblazer and actually flew to Boston and visited Harvard in your pajamas. So there's definitely a lot of options, a lot of new resources that you have. But still, the question remains, what colleges are right for me, and especially, how do I find out? So I want to talk about a couple of questions that you can ask. Ed, as well, will I'll ask you to kind of pepper in some of your expertise as well, and then I'll turn it over to you for the last part of discussion, and then we'll try to have some time for questions as well too. So this slide over here has a few questions that you can ask yourself about colleges. Now, you can apply some of these questions to actually how many colleges you're going to apply to, but I encourage you for if you're just sitting down and trying to figure out what is your ideal college experience, you can talk about or ask yourself where that is, how many students are there, what you would be studying, how much it would cost, and why you want to go there in the first place. Finding different colleges, when we're thinking about where we want to go to college, sometimes the question of why we want to go to college, we don't consider as much. We're thinking more of the prestige or maybe where your parents went or something down the street, but you don't necessarily consider, why do I want to go to college? Is it to get an education? Is it to learn more, like have awesome social experiences or have connections or something like that. There are definitely lots of reasons to go to college. There's not just one reason, and I understand that for lots of students. We can go next slide, please. And if we're not able to, that's okay too. I know that I'm happy to riff on this as well too. And in fact, that's exactly what I'm going to do now. When we were looking at different colleges, there are certain resources that you can ask to find these questions. So to find the answers to these questions, one of the resources is going to be any like college admissions officers or college counselors. People like me, people like Ed. You can visit these people, both maybe if they're coming to you, you're going to the university, or even in like a phone call or an appointment or things like that. So there's lots of different ways to connect with an admissions counselor for sure. There's visits as well that you can do. You can do both an in-person and a virtual visit, making sure that people understand that lots of different colleges have opened up virtual visits a lot more than used to be since the COVID-19 pandemic started. So for some institutions, they're going to offer even more virtual opportunities than they will offer in-person opportunities. For some universities, and I'll talk about this in a second, they will actually track if you visited or not, but many universities just want to get the information out. So a virtual visit can actually do that in some ways a lot better than even an in-person visit in some ways too. Ed, are there any other resources that you are thinking of that have worked for you?
Your counselors, obviously, your counselors are great for research. Bigfuture.com is a great site for that as well. And I was going to talk too about systems. So in that third slide down, if we can go to that, there are a number of systems. So if we just heard from the Cal State, UC, community college system. I've worked for the Jesuit institutions. There's 27 faith-based education programs there. I went to Colby College. Anybody heard of Colby? You did? I was actually on a plane once, and I had a shirt that said Colby, and the flight attendant said, "You must really like cheese." Yeah, I was on my way to Wisconsin, so maybe that's why, right? But Colby is in the NESCAC. It's 44 small Division III schools, so a great host of schools there. There's the Women's Coalition of Colleges. The Ivy League is just a sports league, right? So I don't know why we get all so excited about getting in there. It's just an athletic conference, like SEC. I worked at Lafayette College, which is a Patriot League school. So really think about casting a wide net as you start this search. Like we were saying in the last session, 3,000 schools to consider. And what we're talking about, finding your fit, finding your match, you don't need to have the answers now. There's no ranking system that will tell you where you belong. But really cast that net wide, have fun with that. You may find some things you like in certain types or groups of schools. For example, the Jesuit, or I worked at a school in Hawaii that was part of the Eco League, a small series of schools that were very interested in environmental concerns. So there's always opportunity to expand that list by thinking of who you are and what research or what type of institution you want.
Perfect. Thank you so much. You can get more nuanced with these questions as well too. So there are some universities that serve diverse populations, but then there are HBCUs, there are Hispanic and Latinx serving institutions, there are Native serving institutions. For some people, those kinds of experiences and opportunities actually make a lot more sense than historically white or majority white serving institutions. For some people, larger versus smaller is something they're considering, but how big is a question that you can ask as well too. There, in many cases, there is a pretty big difference between a university of 40,000 students and 20,000 students. In terms of the resources, the housing, access to majors, things like that as well too. And then, visiting as well is important too. I do want to talk, this I will get to in a second, a little bit in more detail, but one great question to ask is if universities consider what is called demonstrated interest. Has anybody ever heard of this term before, demonstrated interest? Okay, a few people. If you haven't heard about it, visiting is one way that you can show your interest in a college. Some colleges actually will consider that in the admissions process, and others will not. So this is always a good question to ask. And other things like admissions interviews, maybe even like emailing a counselor or going on the website, can sometimes be used to make an admissions decision. But not all colleges do this. So if you're trying to prioritize your time when you're visiting, it's always good to find out those things beforehand so you can see, okay, am I visiting to maybe get additional consideration for an application, or is it more just for information? But always create a first draft list. Have a spreadsheet. Think about all the different nuanced traits that you're looking for in colleges. You can put them down as columns, and every time you visit a school or learn more online about them, you can start adding information in any of those rows for those schools. Oh, perfect. So actually, if we can go, if slides are working, if we can go maybe 3 slides forward. Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm going to give you a couple of questions to ask. So if you are visiting or if you are considering different colleges, I want to give you a few questions to ask an admissions person like me, maybe even like faculty or staff or other students, depending on where you're going. And Ed, too, if you have any insight about this. University of Washington is a large public university. Xavier is a private university. It's a religious faith-based university as well, too. So there's lots of different, there's differences in both of our universities, but, not all Jesuit universities are alike. Not all flagship public universities are alike, too. So it's not all like we're the same. Standardized tests. This is the first question that I want to give you as ammunition, or at least put it in your tool belt. You may know, being from California, that many universities across the country have gotten rid of the standardized testing requirement. At least you're not required to send them in. But one, and I see some applause there as well too, which is great. There's a lot of reasons why people did this, but I don't want you to think that it was all because of the pandemic. Bowdoin College, actually, in Maine, was one of the first colleges, if not the first, kind of like prominent college to get rid of like standardized testing requirements, and they did that, I think, in the 60s or 70s. So it has been around for a while. However, the COVID pandemic completely changed the game. Now, I think it's over 1,500 colleges and universities do not require the SAT or the ACT. But it is always important to ask, if you do submit test scores, if they will be considered. At some universities, maybe the UCs, the CSUs, other universities, testing is not a factor. Even if you submit your tests, that may not be a factor in your admissions decision. For some, they don't require them, but if you do submit the tests, they will consider them. So it's always good to ask, will you consider test scores if they are submitted? Because there's differences in how test optional schools consider them. Also, don't automatically assume that the school you're applying to is test optional. MIT recently reinstated the SAT and ACT requirement after getting rid of it during the first years of the pandemic. So not everybody is test optional, even if they once were. We can go next slide, please. So I think this is to say, maybe if you were, for any parents or guardians or older siblings or things like that, the tests that you used to get into college, if you went to college, it's going to be different for your children or your students, because I think there's typically less of an emphasis on test scores. There's more emphasis now, especially among the selective and highly selective schools, on character, more of what's called a holistic admissions process. The courses that you're taking, are you taking the most challenging courses at your school, or a series of challenging courses at your school? Grades, that's all very important. Testing, not necessarily as important for many schools. So you can take the test once, you can take the test multiple times. We've seen diminishing returns after you take the SAT or the ACT. I don't know if it's like 6 or 7 times. It's like there's diminishing returns after a certain amount. So definitely don't break the bank trying to take the test. Yeah, it's always great to use free resources to prepare as well too, because again, there's a lack of emphasis, I think, for many universities on the test. But I understand too that you want to be as prepared as possible. I'm definitely not going to begrudge you if you are using test preparation resources. Just know that it's different than it used to be for many colleges. Go next slide, please. And actually, Ed, did you have anything else to say on standardized tests?
Yeah, for sure. We don't be afraid of the tests. The power is in your hands with that now 1,700 colleges and universities that don't require it. You probably will put it into your strategy. If you learn early, I'm not good at it, then walk away from it. But a lot of juniors will lean into it, maybe do free practice tests. You can play around on Khan Academy. because there are times that the testing could be beneficial. There are certain times that by different major it might be required. For athletes in some cases it might be required. But lean into it, see what it feels like, and if it's not a strength, then walk away and really hone in on those test optional schools. We've seen our averages go way up because students submitting tend to have very high scores, but we're still doing an analysis on campus as to that data point, that tool that we would use in our advising. So as an example, you will probably look at grad school at some point, so your MCAT for med school, your LSAT, GREs, those are standardized tests. Many times within your profession, as actuarial scientists, or my niece that just graduated with a nursing degree was faced with the NCLEX, the National Nursing Exam. So there she was in a standardized test situation. So the process of going through it, trying it, figuring it out if it's part of your application or not, that's a part of this process. But I love what Alex said, don't let it rule your junior spring or by any means your senior fall, because there are plenty of schools that just entirely leave it up to you. But if you do have strong test scores, you look at our mid 50%, you're high in that range, that's a general rule of thumb, you might send those in. In my case, you can call and ask. I've got this score, I'm applying to this major, I'm this type of student, would it behoove me to send these test scores in? So we're glad that it has kind of removed some of that anxiety for you, but know that schools will then start to look at other aspects of your application as delineators, and so you might see more pressure to the curriculum, maybe to activities, so the what will we use instead is still a question that we are trying to unpack and think about. But feel good, and I think many of our seniors do. They feel confident in their application, and we, as readers, have now realized what the tests are. Just a one-day exam that gives us insight into how you do on standardized tests. Who you are beyond that, we see in transcripts and activities and all of that other stuff, so glad that you have that power in your hands. I wish I could have gone test optional, but that was years ago. Pencil and paper we were still doing it with. You juniors will see it online, so Alex.
Perfect. Thank you, Ed. So the second thing that I want to give you as a tool is thinking about your visits critically. So the first thing that I asked all of you to do is before you go on your visits, consider if the schools that you're going to consider demonstrated interest. So if they do, you know that those visits actually may have an impact in the admissions process, and so you can plan accordingly. For the ones that don't have any impact in the admissions process, you just use it as an informational time, meet people, use it as your time, so don't necessarily stress out too much about the visits. Do know as well that virtual and in-person visits are both available for many colleges as well too. The University of Washington does not use demonstrated interest in the admissions process, and I have never worked at any university that does use demonstrated interest. But I'm sure every university uses it differently. So maybe even asking, like, is there a difference between doing a virtual visit or in person in terms of demonstrated interest? But again, I wouldn't let that rule your life as well either. Students are not getting into universities just because they consider demonstrated interest for the most part. So I don't want you to think that that's like the secret tool in. It is something to consider, though. One other thing to consider when you're visiting is have kind of keep an open mind as well, too. Have certain things that you're looking for. Maybe you can compare certain things that you did in your first college draft list of maybe different academic programs or mental health programs. Is it an inclusive campus? Is it diverse? What does diversity mean to you? Is it racially diverse, ethnically diverse, diverse in terms of LGBTQIA representation, things like that? All of these things can have different meanings to you. So have a full list of things that you're looking for. Know that you're probably not going to see all of these things on one visit, but it's good to have sort of a rubric that you're comparing these visits on to. And I wouldn't necessarily judge a school based on one impression either. So maybe the tour guide that you had for that day stepped in a puddle and was got their socks all wet, and they were their favorite socks. There were socks that their mom knitted for them, and they're just ruined, and it's an awful day for that person. You can tell it's more that's a Washington specific analogy. So that might not be a fair representation of the university. So something to keep in mind. We'll go next slide, please. The last thing that I want to say here as well, too, and then see if Ed has any closing thoughts, and then I'll give it to you for the rest of this, is financial aid. So this is the third thing. For a lot of students, the academics are super important. Finding a great social fit is great as well, too. But then financial aid, financial fit is very important as well. I'm sure for a lot of parents and guardians, that is like the number one thing that you were looking at. And I see you, I hear you. It's completely valid as well, too. There's a couple of things to consider, but I want to go back to what this panel said just maybe 15 or 20 minutes ago, which was the sticker price is not necessarily what you will pay if you are going to a university. Different universities have different ways that they give financial aid versus in-state, out-of-state. Maybe for international students, they do give financial aid. They don't give financial aid. But rarely do students pay full sticker price at most universities that they're applying to. There are a couple of terms that I want to make sure that you're acquainted with that can help you understand these things. And these are great things to ask if you're on a visit or going on the website or something like that, talking to someone like me. The net price refers to the, it's basically the price that you will pay or are expected to pay for often 1 year of college. So any college that gets federal funding for scholarships and stuff, which you should not apply to a university that doesn't get federal funding for the most part. They are required to have what's called a net price calculator on campus or on their website. So this is a great opportunity to get an estimate of what it may cost for a year on campus. So this is basically the sticker price minus all of the financial aid you would be projected to get, and that would be the net price. It also can include things like miscellaneous expenses, transportation, housing, food. So definitely don't just look at tuition. Think about if you're going to stay on campus, what is the cost there? Do they have like a free bus pass or subway pass that you get with your student ID? Do you have to pay extra for transportation? These things like that. The COA, the cost of attendance, that is the total. That's the total cost of coming to the university. It's similar to net price. So again, for some people, this may be the sticker price, but this is just the cost to attend. For some people, it's not necessarily going to take into account your financial need or anything like that too. But so if you're trying to figure out how much am I going to pay, what is the price minus all the financial aid that I'm going to get, that would be more net price. And then at the EFC, and this is soon to be known / is already known now more as the SAI, or the Student Aid Index. It used to be called the Estimated Family Contribution. This is a term that you may see on the FAFSA, or the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. The Estimated Family Contribution, or Student Aid Index, is the amount of money that, according to these need-based financial aid applications, your family is likely expected to pay, basically after you get all your financial aid and things like that. So let's say that you go to a university that the total cost of attendance is like $80,000 without any financial aid, but your student aid index, or estimated family contribution, is only $20,000. So you're doing the FAFSA, and it says, well, your family can basically be expected to pay $20,000 per year towards your college experience. So that is the estimated family contribution. A great thing to ask is, does this college, does my college that I'm interested in meet full need? And what that means typically is, if my estimated family contribution is $20,000, am I going to pay more than $20,000, or are you going to meet that full need? Some colleges, the answer will be, yes, we will meet that full need. Other colleges, it's going to be no. You may find that there's a gap between your need and what we're going to give you for financial aid. So definitely something to consider. We're going to go to the next slide, please. Finishing up with financial aid. I had mentioned the FAFSA. The FAFSA is the Free Application for Student Aid, for federal student aid. As long as you have a Social Security number, you are eligible to complete the FAFSA, or if you are a DACA student, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. You in some cases may not be eligible to complete the FAFSA, but you may still qualify for financial aid depending on the university. This is based on financial need. This is where you're going to find that EFC or SAI. Do it. Complete it. It's free. I don't know if I mentioned that. Everybody, even if you don't think you're going to qualify for financial aid, this is also how you get things like loans, work study, So it's more than just grants and scholarships that you get. The WASFA is just for Washington, so this is probably not going to apply to anybody in the room. But do know that if you don't qualify for the FAFSA, your state, so California, may have a separate financial aid application as well, too, that you can complete. The CSS profile is also another, it's a need-based financial aid application that some universities, typically private universities, use, and it looks at a little bit more information than the FAFSA. And then there might also be some institution-specific forms. And actually, if we can go one more slide, I think this is the last financial aid slide, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Your financial aid package may include things like grants, which is money that you don't have to pay back. It's typically need-based. Scholarships are they can be need-based or they can be non-need-based. Good thing to keep in mind, too, is that some scholarships depend on lots of different factors, and other scholarships, they'll tell you, like, you get X amount of money if you have a 3.7 GPA or something like that. So some of them are very cut and dry. Work study is money that you would get working at the university, and then loans is that's money that you do have to pay back. The FAFSA, just built into the FAFSA, it has $5,500 of federal, what are called federal direct loans that first-year students are eligible to take out, $6,500 for your second year, and then $7,500 for your third year and beyond. If you are unable to make the cost of attendance through the combination of all the federal direct loans, any scholarships, grants, and work study, I definitely would think twice before you're taking out any additional money. There is money that is available through things called like the Parent Plus loans and things like that. But it's just know that the federal government tries to limit the amount of direct loans that are available just so that you're not overextending yourself. Ed, is there anything else that you wanted to add there? And I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
I think that's great. I mean, we're talking here about finding financial fit, and that is part of this process. And your counselors will address that quite a bit when you're kind of leaning into this search. So that social fit we were talking about, I'm just going to step this way, that social fit will be part of it, and then finding that financial fit and kind of where these scholarships play out. There was a study or book written called Colleges Unranked, and it talked about the number of students that get into their number one or number two choice. And what was cool is that it's a lot, well over 80%, which statistically is impossible with all the deny letters that colleges send. But what happens is they surveyed the students junior year, after they applied, and after they got decisions back. And students reprioritized their list based on scholarship and cost of attendance. So when you lean into this, loving a college list is a much better strategy than loving a particular college, because that financial fit will be a big part of it. There may be a day that you say, I got into this college, but it costs $30,000 more. Am I going to get that much difference of an experience? And we would kind of argue no, in the sense that we say, you show up on our campus, you're going to make the experience awesome, so lean in and take advantage of what we offer on our campus. We'll go to the next slide and kind of talk about selectivity, because that's what's really changed in our world. Back in the day when I applied to school, we would apply to about 3 different colleges. Students now are getting closer to a dozen, 9 to 12. So there aren't more students. They're applying to more schools. A school that gets more applications didn't necessarily get to be a better university. They just get more applications. And we can prove that statistically just looking at the SAT, ACT optional phenomenon. Right? Schools like Colgate doubled their application pool in 1 year because they were optional. Does that indicate that they doubled the experience? Not at all, just more students applying, right? So selectivity, when you do the search, will kind of help dictate or put together that college list. When you approach Alex and I, we understand where you are as young college searchers, right? You've got a list, right? And we want to help you identify what our colleges are strong in, what we work well, what type of students work well on our campus. But we understand when we meet you through this journey that you're building capacity to make a final decision. So even though you apply to 12 schools, how many can you go to? 1, right? You can only choose 1. So if we click to the next slide, we'll kind of break down some of the selectivity numbers, because this group, do one more click. We know what percentage Stanford took, right? We talked about 4%, right? How many of the admitted students to Stanford do you think chose them? What percentage of admitted students to Stanford said, yes, I'm coming? How many? 95. You think 5% of the people turned down Stanford? Woo, that takes some guts, right? But yeah, you could, right? They probably boast in the high 80s, low 80s, that the most selective schools are not going to net everybody. That's proof that all the power is with you, the students, right? You decide where to apply, you decide where to go. We, in the middle, decide who to admit. Let that be secondary. But schools in that highly selective range, any school that admits below 20%, it is a decision you can never look back and think, why was that made? The institution, we serve our own priorities. We make decisions that are good for us. We find balance in our classes geographically, by diversity, by major. So we do things that are out of your control, making those decisions. But those admit decisions, students hone in on and understand. Those yield rates, always look at those yield rates. And if we click to the next slide, we'll see another school that kind of still stays in what they call the highly selective group. I worked at Lafayette College that fell into this category, probably admitting somewhere below 35% of the applicants, a significant drop in yield. Huge drop in yield when you get to some of these schools, right? Down to 40%, 50%, 28%, right? So that yield rate, I'm bringing this up because Alex introduced us to demonstrated interest. The why it's important, we want to pick people that are going to pick us, right? That's why the demonstrated interest has entered into the conversation. And I love that Alex said, don't overdo it. Don't spend the whole time, junior and senior year, looking to connect to colleges. But as you demonstrate interest, you can help yourself in admissions. But importantly, you're increasing your capacity to make that decision in April. The way I like to tell students to look at demonstrated interest is that you are learning what colleges offer. The way my freshmen and sophomore on campus talk about it is, tell the students searching to build a college bucket list. Think of what you want to do with 4 years. Define it by institution. I want to study abroad. I know Xavier has a program in Rome that's partnered with St. Louis. That's the program I'm going to there. That's a great demonstration of interest you can talk to me about. You can write about it in a supplemental essay, but you're giving me indication that you see yourself fitting in at my particular school. And as we move down to the less selectivity, again, the national average is over 7 or about 70%. We'll do one more click or 2 more clicks, and you can see those yield rates drop. So that is a power situation for you students to understand. You're applying to more schools. The schools haven't necessarily gotten better, but you still can only attend one school. So Alex and I, we as universities love to watch and guard that. But do the lean in as you create this balanced list. Obviously, it's not a great idea to apply to only schools in the most selective category, right? That's a dangerous thing to do, right? And finding balance within this list, when Alex was just talking about scholarship and financial aid, these guys might sweeten the pot, right? This might be, hey, you're standing high in our applicant pool, we're going to give you a $30,000 or $15,000 scholarship to attend our school. Many out-of-state schools have specific scholarships for Californians. The state schools, the 17, have that WUI program. A lot of private schools have grants set aside just for students from California. So when you balance that list, the reason you're doing it, the reason there might be schools on the list that you're not familiar with because they haven't won a national championship recently in a sport, research them, look at them, consider them. That's part of finding that fit. And we'll click through to the next slide, please. A little bit about selectivity. And a lot of us, again, when you're doing this review process, a lot of schools are holistic. That means they consider the whole applicant. Alex touched on, without testing, how we may dive deeper into your activities, into your background, but a lot of these schools now, we do have to look at something new, right? So the who you are, the what you'll bring to our campus is a critical part of how we make that decision. Again, in your research, you may find opportunity to bring in new schools to your list, but you may find opportunity to say, you know what, I think this school doesn't fit who I am. They're not kind of valuing what I do, so maybe they come off that list. But your councils will go through your application deadlines, the early decision, early action. We won't get into too much here, but it is a strategy that many Californians were employed. Do you guys have an early program?
No, we don't.
Yeah, and we don't either. So we're rolling admissions, students can apply. But that early decision, it's binding. If admitted, you have to go. That is the highest level of demonstrated interest you can show. I'm saying I'm coming if I go. Early action, you still have opportunities to consider other schools. So it is a tool and a strategy that your counselors might work with you on. We'll do the next click here, see what we're going to kind of come down to. Yeah, here's what we consider in the application. You're familiar with this, but again, that rise in demonstrated interest might be part of it, especially if you're applying to schools out of state. But again, don't think of it just as a strategy for admission. Think of it as an opportunity to build a narrative or a bucket list or a reason to make that final selection when it comes to picking a particular school. And again, that demonstrated interest, your counselors can talk about that. Take advantage of probably the 80 or so colleges that will visit this school. The National College Fair will take place in San Diego later on in April. So take opportunity to make personal connections, say hello. We love a thank you note, don't we? If you come and visit with us, right? So we'll do a next click, and not gifts. You don't need to send us gifts. I love chocolate chip cookies. Just putting it out there, though. And you can go to the next slide there, actually. We'll kind of move forward and kind of come into that three-tiered list, and then we'll kind of open this up to have a little dialogue with you. But your counselors will talk about putting schools into this three-tiered list. If you go one more click, schools that are reaches for you, schools that are targets for you, and schools that are likely. So going back to those grids, when you saw the admission requirements, the percentage of applicants is important, but really the GPA, mid 50% that Alex introduced you to, if they take SAT or ACT, where that falls, rigor of curriculum, will help you to put schools into this three-category list. Again, what might happen if you apply to a bunch of reach schools, you're going to get rejected. How's that going to feel? Awful, right? Who cares? Celebrate it. If Brown denies you, just be like, psh, Brown. Who wants to go to a school that the color's brown, right? Brown, I don't want to go to Brown. Rule it out, right? Lean into those searches, but have a reason why. Not because it's awesome, it's famous or it's well known. Have a connection to that school, right? But you'll probably get some deny up top. That's okay. It's part of the process. The target schools, you fit right in there. Nice, comfortable fit. You fit their school profile. Your counselors might even give you indication students from your high school do well in that application pool. Those targets, again, not guaranteed because we're making decisions that serve our institution as well as look at your background, but some good options there. Those likely schools, you love them. You can define the why, and there's many likely schools that look statistically, except for admissions, look statistically like the Reach School. Same number of students, same opportunities for research, similar surroundings, right? But those likely schools are probably going to give you opportunity to claim some scholarship, claim the admission part of that process, and maybe you can go there and be a big fish in a small pond. So anything else from that, Alex, as far as where you fall? And we'll do one more click as...
Yeah, I don't think so, and I know, oh, yeah.
There we go. Yeah, I love them all.
I know we probably want to give people some time to transition to the next thing, because I think we're at like 5 till.
Oh, I'm good.
Yeah, is there anything else we wanted to do to wrap up? Or
yeah, any questions or Alex or I?
You know, what I'll say too is that if you have to run, feel free to do so. I know I'm going to be hanging out for a few minutes as well too, so if you have questions for me, super happy to answer those as well. So.
Yeah, but enjoy the search. Think about what you're doing on campus, your bucket list, not the where you go. It's more important to think about what you do. A great book Frank Bruni wrote, Where You Go Isn't Who You'll Be. Track that down. It's a great family read as you lean into this college search. So happy searching, everybody.
Thank you so much.